My guest this week is the son of a commander of the Indian Empire. He himself went on in the fullness of time to become a commander of the British Empire and was eventually also to receive a knighthood. His roles in the theatre are far too numerous to list, as are his credits in television and films. He began as an amateur actor and took his first professional role almost 55 years ago. His career still in full swing, and in order to conduct this interview, I had to await the end of a day's rehearsals. He was born in 1911 in Hertfordshire, one of 4 children of an Indian naval officer. He is Sir Michael Hordern, and I asked him first whether there were any other theatrical connections within the family.
Absolutely none whatever.
Describe, if you will, for me, life at home when you were a child.
Well, life at home, as far as I remember, was all happiness. We had great fun as 3 brothers and a baby sister. I don't remember my childhood very far because during the First World War, my mother went out to join my father in India, and we 3 boys were left behind. We were sent to a boarding school in Sussex, which I was very fond and still am. And we spent most of the war there. So I didn't re-meet my family until the end of the war. My mother I re-met in 1918, and I re-met my father, who I couldn't remember at all, in 1919, when he actually retired.
So, effectively, by that time you were about 7 or 8 by my reckoning. How close did the family then become?
The family became very close afterwards, particularly with my mother. My father was always rather distant. We never got to know him like we got to know my mother. We didn't really share a lot of interests, I think. We were very much country boys, and I think my father tagged along all right, but he wasn't really a great country man. He rode a horse, and we rode our ponies and later horses and so on, but we were never as close to him as we all were to our mother, who was a very powerful lady, and we all adored her. And she died very young. She died at the age of 59, and it was a great shock to the whole family.
Can you take us through your early education?
Yes, I never went to any sort of little primary school, because when my mother went out to India, leaving us 3 boys behind, my 2 brothers were by then at a preparatory school called Windlesham House, just outside Brighton. And in order to accommodate me, really, while my parents were abroad, I couldn't go with my mother to India, of course, because they were torpedoing ships and one thing and another. This was in the early part of the First World War. So I was sent to this school as in a sort of kindergarten capacity. And I can remember it, at the age of 5, being terribly unhappy with all these great big boys, 80 or 70 or 80 great big boys all around me, and I felt, I was lost.
Your more formal education?
Well, by the time my mother came back from India, I was old enough to remain properly at Windlesham House. Then I got into my shorts and uniform and black and white cap, and I was one of the boys at school, and I had a marvelous time. During the time that my mother was out there and we 3 boys were at school, we were there all the year, and we had wonderful times in the holidays with the whole of this school to roam about in, and nothing to do, no lessons, no nothing. It was great fun.
How began your interest in the amateur theatre?
Well, I think it began at Windlesham House when I remember I was in the top form, and one of my fellow pupils, and we were 2 keen members of the association that we started, called the A Acting Association. the classroom A being where we did our lessons. And I remember we wrote our own plays, and I wrote a play, or I dare say it was a sort of committee job, called The Man with a Speckled Face. And I was the man with the speckled face. Why I was speckled, I can't think, but I was a criminal anyhow, behind bars. And I can remember that to this day. And I remembered it keenly when I went down to Windlesham the other day, literally only a couple of months ago, to open the marvellous theatre that they've built there.
Where did you start work and when?
I didn't start until I was getting on, as you might say. I didn't actually become a professional actor until I was 25. I did a lot of rather good, I hope, amateur work. I joined one or two amateur companies, a sort of amateur repertory company in London called the St Pancras People's Theatre. Turned out quite a lot of people who went into the professional theatre. And by that time I was working in a firm called the Educational Supply Association. I was selling exercise books and desks and chalk and all the blackboards to schools. And I used to come roaring back to London when I ought to have been selling exercise books to a girls' school in Eastbourne, because I was due to rehearse some play in London, amateurly, that evening. And I came to the conclusion that I'd got to make up my mind, one way or another. And I chanced to be offered a professional job in the theatre, very tea-boy and third assistant, stage manager and that sort of thing, a play that was going to be put on at the Savoy Theatre. And I went to my managing director and told him this, and he said, all right, well, you can leave us at a moment's notice. We're quite happy with the work you've been doing, so not in any way throwing you out, but if that's what you want to do, okay. And I left the ESA on a Saturday morning, and I turned up at the stage door of the Savoy Theatre on Monday morning. And dare I say, I haven't looked back since.
Can you tell me when and how, if you like, you met your wife?
Yes, indeed. After I'd done this play at the Savoy, which fortunately failed, because I went mad with boredom doing the sort of job I was doing, I was very shortly after rather kind of taken up by a chap who's very much still going in the theatrical world called Patrick Ide. And he appeared to see some promise in me and said, well, what you really need is a bit of weekly rep. And I have a very great friend who runs the Little Theatre at Bristol, and I will recommend you to Ronnie Russell. And I never cease saying that how much I owe to Ronnie Russell, who really was wonderful, wonderful, and tremendous discipline and everything. And anyhow, I went there, and I thought, ooh, professional actresses, my gosh, there'll be actresses there, what fun. And I remember going to the very first day of rehearsal. This was in 1936, I suppose, or 37. I can never remember dates. Going to the first day of rehearsal, and there were two beautiful actresses. One was blonde and the other was brunette, and I married the brunette.
Can you remember when you were married?
Yes, we were married not until some time after, because we were there for 2 years, as it might be, walking out, and then the war came, and I joined the Navy, and we weren't actually married until the middle of the war, 1943.
Let's talk a little bit about your war service then, if you please.
Well, I volunteered for the Navy. I was in the OTC at school, and I hated it. I absolutely hated carrying a rifle. I hated that awful khaki uniform. And when war broke out, I thought, oh, God, I really can't face this. So I immediately volunteered for the Navy. And in those days, in 1939, you couldn't just get into the Navy like that. There were too many people. There was a waiting list. So they said, well, go away, and your name's down, and when we want you, we'll call for you. What do you do? I said, I'm an actor. And they said, well, you must go back and act. So I joined with the lady whose in the fullness of time going to be my wife, we joined a funny little one-horse repertory company in Bath. And we we were there for some time, and at Christmas time, the Navy rang up and said, right, we're ready for you, Hordern, you see. And I said, oh, that's terribly awkward, because we're doing the Christmas show, you see. It's going to go on, but not just for 1 week, but for 2. And we're in the middle of rehearsals for it. And they said, oh, that's all right. You go back and do your Christmas show, and we'll call for you when we want you. So not very much long after that, they called me again, and I said, okay, and went. And I was sent off to Plymouth Barracks, where I donned my bell-bottom trousers, and I served as a naval rating for about a year. I was a gunner on the back end of an old merchant ship sailing the 7 seas. And then when I got back at the end of a year at sea with that lot, avoiding the torpedoes by the grace of God, I was, they said, well, you ought to take a commission. So I took a commission. I became a bleeding officer. And I did rather well. And they were there at that time looking for some of their brighter people, who apparently I was, to direct fighter aircraft by radar, which had just come into the fleet. And so I did a tiny, short course at Yeovilton Royal Naval Air Station, and found myself as Assistant Fighter Direction Officer in HMS Illustrious. And I served in her for 2.5 years. I was very happy years. It wasn't long after I joined her that my senior FDO, Fighter Direction Officer, came home to a job at the Admiralty, and I found myself the only trained Fighter Direction Officer in the Eastern Fleet. We were out in Mombasa. And it really was such an important job that they had to up my rank by 2 stages, and I found myself a lieutenant commander before I could turn round, which was very pleasant.
And at the end of the war, then, it was back to the theatre. By what route?
Well, my last year in the Navy, I also was sent home to a job in the Admiralty. And I spent nearly a year, I think, in the Admiralty. And of course, I had free time. I had evenings ashore, as you might say, and weekends and all sorts of luxuries. And I was in London. And I pulled a few of the old strings that still existed from before the war, when I'd done a bit of radio work. And I found myself in quite a bit of demand at the Broadcasting House. So I did quite a bit of radio work even before I took off my uniform.
Don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs. Worthington. Don't put your daughter on the stage. The profession is overcrowded and the struggle's pretty tough. And admitting the fact she's burning to act, that isn't quite enough. She has nice hands to give the wretched girl her due, but don't you think her bust is too developed for her age? I repeat, Mrs. Worthington, sweet Mrs. Worthington, don't put your daughter on the stage. Regarding yours, dear Mrs. Worthington, of Wednesday the 23rd, although your baby may be keen on a stage career, how can I make it clear? This is not a good idea. For her to hope, dear Mrs. Worthington, is on the face of it absurd. Her personality is not in reality exciting enough, inviting enough for this particular sphere. Don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs. Worthington. Don't put your daughter on the stage. She's a bit of an ugly duckling, you must honestly confess, and the width of her seat would surely defeat her chances of success. It's a loud voice, And though it's not exactly flat, she'll need a little more than that to earn a living wage. On my knees, Mrs. Worthington, please, Mrs. Worthington, don't put your daughter on the stage. Don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs. Worthington, don't put your daughter on the stage. Though they said at the School of Acting she was lovely as Peer Gynt, I'm afraid on the whole an ingenue role would emphasize her squint. She's a big girl, and though her teeth are fairly good, she's not the type I ever would be eager to engage. No more buts, Mrs. Worthington, nuts, Mrs. Worthington, don't put your daughter on the stage.
Noel Coward there then, and Don't Put Your Daughter on the Stage, Mrs. Worthington. As appropriate a piece of music as could be conceived for this week's programme. You're listening to Reflections. I'm Richard Spendlove, and my guest, the actor Sir Michael Hordern. Sir Michael, it's quite clear that the roles you've taken and the parts that you've played are far too numerous to mention. Talk to us, if you will, about one or two of your own favourite ones.
It's awfully difficult to choose between the different types of character that one. Fortunately, I have never been typed, so there isn't a sort of Michael Hordern part. And I love playing comedy, and I love playing stuff that is not comedy. I've played in one medium or another. I have played in 30 of the 37 plays of Shakespeare. And I've played Mr. Toad in Toad of Toad Hall with very great pleasure, and many other comedies. I suppose if I had to pick out, say, two, and they're contrasting characters that have given me immense satisfaction, one is King Lear, and the other is a play of Tom Stoppard's, which I first did in 1972, called Jumpers, which is an outrageous comedy, really. You can't place it, really, in any pigeonhole. But I think George Moore in Jumpers and King Lear in King Lear are the two of the high spots of my career, certainly.
I don't know whether it's really... whether there's any point in asking this, because if we look down the list of your credits, it seems unlikely. But have you ever known the fear or the possibility of unemployment?
Do you know, I'm almost I have to confess that I have not. I feared immediate failure, as every actor does on the first night of every play. But I have never overdrawn at the bank, so to speak.
You were in 1972 awarded the CBE, the first accolade for your professional work. What was your first intimation that this was to happen?
I think my first intimation, so far as I remember, was just an envelope through the door saying that the Prime Minister has recommended to Her Majesty, or however it's put, and if so, would you accept the honour, or whatever they call it, of CBE?
To the next award, then. Tell us about that one.
Knighthood. Well, that was rather different, because I was in Mexico on a film, and I didn't know this had come through the door here, and my wife and daughter had seen the envelope with 10 Downing Street on it, and they thought, well, perhaps we'd better not keep this till Michael comes home 2 weeks' time. Perhaps we'd better open it and see. And indeed, when they opened it, it was saying that the Prime Minister had recommended Her Majesty to Her Majesty and so on, you know, the order of knighthood. And they thought, well, I don't know. I think perhaps we'd better let him know about this. And in fact, it was just as I was coming home. And I really, looking back on it now, I can't remember whether I did hear while I was still in Mexico, or whether it wasn't. No, I didn't. That's right, I didn't. I came back here, and they had rang up 10 Downing Street and said, Michael is in the wilds of Mexico at the moment, but we took the liberty of opening the envelope, and what shall we do? And by then, the Downing Street had alerted the embassy in Mexico, and they had been asked to get in touch with me to tell me over there. But before they could do that, I was on the aircraft coming home. So I didn't know that I'd been offered a knighthood until I walked in through this door.
So effectively then the Mexican embassy knew before you did?
Yes, indeed, yes.
Whilst we're still in the regions of wives and daughters and so on, tell me about your children.
I only have one child. We had a daughter in 1946 when I was still in the Navy. No, I wasn't. No, I was just out. And she now has two small children, a boy of 5.5 and a girl of 2.5. And they live down in Norfolk. Alas, entirely the wrong direction. And it's a very successful setup.
You are, in fact, still working. What are you doing at the moment?
I'm doing a television film of a very black comedy written by Kingsley Amis. It's about 10 years ago, I think he wrote it, called Ending Up. It's about 5 extraordinarily disparate old septuagenarians, 3 men and 2 girls, 2 women, living together in a country cottage and getting abominably on each other's nerves. It's very funny, I hope, and rather horrific. It is real black comedy.
It begs the question, are you ever going to retire?
No, I don't think so. I don't think any actor, as long as he can stand up and as long as he can learn lines, there's no reason why he should. And there's a very good market, you see, for elderly actors like me. Instead of hiring a splendid young chap of 45 and painting lines on his face.
Thank you very much. 45 and beyond.
You've got the real thing here. So there you are. There's quite a market for us old chaps.
Finally, then, to draw the programme to its usual conclusion, I'm going to ask you if you will allow yourself to be put in the position of having taken away from you every memory you have except one, and that is the only one that you will be permitted to keep. Would you like to tell us what that might be?
It's terribly difficult, isn't it? It's like that last question on Desert Island Discs. Oh my God, what a difficult question. I think it would be the first rehearsal of that repertory season at Bristol when I met those 2 beautiful actresses, the blonde and the brunette was to become my wife.